So I'd like to once again thank Shelley Birnbaum and Jill Kamen and Murray Hart for sponsoring this series, appreciating that you have made this learning and wonderful experience happen. Last week, we met Jonathan Sachs, the philosopher and the social critic, pointing to the decline of community, to the absence of sufficient face-to-face interaction, to a focus on the I, and to politicians' guilt in dividing their citizens into them and us. Today, we learn from the rabbinic Sachs, student of Torah, but still very much a thinker. And today he will suggest a few remedies. The overall remedy, I believe, he says in this book and in the book Radical Then and Radical Now, is that we be students of our sources and see what our tradition has to offer to heal the world. Be part, he says, of a necessary dialogue between Torah and contemporary society. And in so doing, we will gain insight into the human condition. We will explore today what Sachs considers to be the two most powerful ways of building community. Now, I'm making up for the lack of text last week. I don't want you to forget, or I to forget how to read, so I will be sharing. Okay, everybody sees that? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, so I just want to refresh our memory, so I've picked two excerpts that I believe sum up what we did last week, and in case anyone wasn't here, this really fills you in. In his new book, A Time to Build, Yuval Levin argues that social media have undermined our social lives. They plainly encourage the vices most dangerous to a free society. They drive us to speak without listening, to approach others confrontationally rather than graciously, to spread conspiracies and rumors, to dismiss and ignore what we would rather not hear, to make the private public, to oversimplify a complex world, to react to one another much too quickly and curtly. And they eat away at our capacity for patient toleration, our decorum, our forbearance, our restraint. These are crowd behaviors, not community ones. And he goes on, today's politics, which have seen a rise in populism, is often about, as we said, division and confrontation. It is about dividing a nation into us and them. It is about resentment and fear and allocation of blame. It is about anger and a sense of betrayal. It is oppositional. Covenantal politics, by contrast, is about we, the people, bound by a sense of shared belonging and collective responsibility, about strong local communities, active citizens, and the devolution of responsibility. The concept of covenant sees relationships not in terms of interests, but of moral commitment. It changes everything it touches, from marriage to friendship to economics and politics, by turning self-interested individuals into a community in pursuit of the common good. Now, I'd like to give you a bit of background regarding the first example we're going to look at. His first Torah-based healing suggestion. November 6th, 1995. Anybody remember what happened on that day? Well,
wasn't that Rabin's assassination?
yes,
Yeah.
Linda.
Yeah.
Yes. It was the day of the funeral, and Rabbi Sachs was flying back to Britain together with Tony Blair and Prince Charles. During the flight, Rabbi Sachs, though I find this hard to believe, you're sitting with two colorful figures, Tony Blair and Prince Charles, but he was sitting there reading, if you can see, from an edition of the Torah called Mikraot Gdolot. Now, I'm going to turn it around, and what you see, and he's studying from this, you see the main text, and then you see at least 6 different commentaries surrounding it. So Rabbi Sachs is sitting there, and he's reading that week's Parsha. Blair, who, if you don't know, is quite a religious man and also studies the Bible regularly, was intrigued by the layout. And what happened is that all 3 of them had a shiur, a lesson with him. Well, what evolved from that was that Rabbi Sachs and Tony Blair, even when he became prime minister, met regularly, and they, at the end of their agenda, would study Torah. Well, at one session, Prime Minister Blair says to Sachs, "I've come to the boring bit." And Rabbi Sachs looked at him and said, "What do you mean? Which boring bit?" And Blair says, "Well, the part about the Mishkan, or the Tabernacle, at the end of Exodus. It just goes on with the details." And he's quite right. If you take a look, and Sachs makes this comparison, if you look at how many verses are spent on describing the creation of this grand world, around 34, as opposed to about 500 verses describing the building of the tabernacle. That's incredible. Anybody want to venture an educated guess of what that would signify? This is a bit on the side, but it's interesting. What message could God be giving us by only talking about the creation of the world so succinctly, as opposed to this construction? Anybody?
Well, the one is done by God, the other is done by the people.
Therefore, Gladys? Absolutely. So what?
It was to be made by the community. Everybody had a job to do.
Okay. All right. Together with that, absolutely.
God didn't need any instruction as to what he was doing, but the people certainly did.
Oh, okay. Look at that way. I was actually going to say that it actually gives a message, as other places do, that this is
Inside and the outside.
probably saying God is more interested in what we do than in what he does. And Sachs also says that it's probably a lot more difficult to build a home, which is what the tabernacle is, for God than it was for God. And not just because he didn't need instructions to build a home for us.
I
Yes,
also read something else that Sachs had written, that why is this included in Exodus? You know, it's like something that we would expect in Leviticus because it has to do with the tabernacle and laws. But what I think what he said is that, you know, we were relying on God for everything, for all the miracles, for getting us out of Egypt, for the manna in the desert. And now God wanted to give the people something to do so that they would feel a sense of independence and accomplishment, that they were being built as a nation, and so that they could go forward in that respect. So there was a lot of emphasis on also on how everybody could contribute.
absolutely. A very good point that it's a gradual process, but a few people heard this at another session that, for instance, with the Exodus, God was responsible for everything that happened there. But once he finished that project, you can see, even by looking at certain verbs and the word for save, that one word is save where God is doing the saving, and the other version, which we won't get into now, shows that the people are involved. So you're absolutely right that God is looking for human beings to be partners with him and to not take a passive role. Thank you. And we are going to ask that question. Why the building of the tabernacle is in Exodus? Because we know that the subject is the building of a nation. So why is it not in Leviticus, Vayikra, which deals with service in the tabernacle? So remember that Sachs is looking at each parasha, and the ones I've chosen, he is seeing the world's problems today, and something goes off as he sees something happening and says, something like this, a precedent, or this is making me think that there's something I can glean from this ancient text, which was radical then and it's radical now in some of its suggestions. So if we move to text number 2, we're talking here about Parashat Vayakhel in Cypressmont in Exodus. So this pasuk is describing when Moshe had gone up to Har Sinai, and we know that he's taking a very long time to come back. And the people get very, very anxious. When the people saw that Moshe was so long in coming down from the mountain, they assembled, and the word is Vayakhel, Kuf He Lamed, around Aharon, and said, come, make us gods who will go before us. Now, we're not going to get into how Aaron reacted. That's a whole other discussion. But what kind of image do you have of this assembly of people? What do you see? How would you describe it? What are you imagining when you hear that they're standing at the bottom, they assembled, and they're saying, come make us gods? Physically, how do you see it?
They're unhappy.
Somebody?
They're unhappy and they're expressing it.
Insurrection, sort of like we saw on
Okay,
Capitol
all
Hill.
right. Both. Very good. So now Moshe sees this and he faces a challenge, for he is witnessing probably the most serious collective sin that our people could have committed, unless they go and have parties tonight. I'm not really laughing about that. So Moshe comes back and he needs to rebuild a shattered community. You know, the problem with them wanting that golden calf is, did they really believe that Moshe is God? But we all need something secure, something tangible. And we all certainly know what we're talking about these days. But that aside, he has the task of rebuilding again this shattered community. How does he proceed? So look at the next, text 3. In contrast, juxtaposed to text 2. Moshe assembled the same Hebrew word, Vayakhel, and Kuf He Lamed from Kahal or Kehillah, the whole Israelite community, and said to them, these are the things God has commanded you to do. Why does it use the same verb? He is intentionally assembling them in a very similar way. Just as the collective sin was committed by people acting as a kahal, Moshe brings them back together again as if to atone and to start again also as a kahal. Now, Sachs wonders about the nature of this community because it's a group of people that can be assembled for bad and they can be assembled for good. In fact, in classic Hebrew, we have 3 different words for community. So let's look at this. We have tzibur, we have edah, and we have what we've just been talking about, kehillah or kahal. Now, the beauty of building from the root of a Hebrew word, tzavar, the tzadi bet resh. Anybody know what that is? Hitztabrut, lihitztaber. Now, tzibur we know is public, community. Tzavar means to heap upon or to pile up. So when you use that word, and I have a feeling somebody might be wondering something, we'll see. But when you use the word tzibur, it's usually a community in the minimalist sense, meaning it's a mere aggregate formed by numbers. That's what a minyan is. You need a certain amount. And Sachs in his book actually says it's like you have people standing at the kotel. They happen to be there and they happen to form a minyan because there are at least 10 of them. But the people don't know each other. They don't have anything else in common. And it's just because of their numbers. So it isn't out of a sense of identity or collective identity. They may not have anything in common. They just happened to be together at that moment. All right, so it gives you a minyan, but not necessarily very meaningful. And you use the word tzibor in modern Hebrew, tachburat tzibori, public transportation. Whatever, okay. Now, look at the next word for community. And people who have gone to camp know that an Eidah is a division at camp, but there's in Toronto, Adat Yisrael, Adat Shalom, yes? All right, so it's also a community. Now, what's the shoresh of Eidah? Ayin Dalid, Ed. What's an Ed? Edim, a witness. Yes. So an Eidah, as opposed to the tzibur, is a community of like-minded people who have a collective identity, for they have witnessed the same things. They share perhaps a common faith, purpose, and so that's very different from the tzibur. Now, kahal and kehila. And this is an amazing idea. Its members are different from one another. But just as they came together for the Golden Calf Project, that's what brought them together. In a similar way, a kehillah can be brought together, as Moshe did, for a positive purpose. So there they assembled, and the only thing perhaps, not really, that they had in common was that they were anxious and angry that Moshe was not back. Then Moshe, we said, brings them together again, assembles them, but now he's going to use them or give them a positive project. But it's the same idea. And what's the beauty of it? They're driven by a constructive purpose, because what is he telling them they're going to do now? They're going to build God's home, the tabernacle. That's literally a constructive purpose. Now, what does Moshe do? And that's why it uses the same word Vayakhel, he assembled them. That when you give a group a purpose, a mission that they all feel they can be a part of, even if nothing else they share in common, that will hold them together. Each of them was distinct, but when he tells them that they are going to do this project, listen what he says to them. Take from what you have an offering to God. Everyone who is willing to bring to God an offering of gold, silver, and bronze, all you who are skilled among you are to come and make everything the Lord has commanded. So when beginning again, Moshe, as a leader, has to know, how am I going to rebuild this society? And he gives thought to it and realizes they've shown that they can assemble if there's a project. Maybe it was a negative one, but I can do that. But if I really wanted to succeed, I have to let each of them feel that they have something particular to contribute. Now, this in fact is what happens. Then the whole Israelite community withdrew from Moshe's presence, and everyone who was willing and whose heart moved him came and brought an offering to God for the work on the tent of the meeting. Now, notice it says an offering. It wasn't one and the same. Each brought what he or she wanted to bring, whatever that was, for all its service and for the sacred garments. All who were willing, what's the significance of that? That it was that they were doing it with a full heart. Men and women came and brought gold jewelry of all kinds, brooches, earrings, rings, and ornaments. Everyone who had blue, purple, or scarlet yarn, those presenting an offering of silver or bronze, every skilled woman spun with her hands and brought what she had spun. The leaders brought onyx, stones, and other gems. All the Israelite men and women who were willing brought to God free will offerings for all the work God, through Moses, had commanded them to do. What you have here, in essence, is Moshe took a kahal, a kehillah, with its diversity, and turned it into an Eidah, that they now had this collective responsibility, singleness of purpose of building a home, Mishkan, for God, but they were preserving their diversity in the gifts that they brought to God. So what is the greatness of the tabernacle? It's a collective achievement where the individual could remain distinct, himself, herself, and each contribution, and therefore each contributor, was valued. Now, this is considered one of Moshe's greatest achievements in being wise enough to know that he had to go about it this way. Now, remember, he's still dealing with a group of people who don't know what it is to be distinct. So I think it was Toby who mentioned that they're going through this process and becoming more active. And that's why we call him ultimately Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. That's what Rav means, by the way, our teacher, that he knew how to go about it, what elements were important. So he's making a balance, and this is a long time ago, between a need for individualism and being part of something greater than me. And Sachs brings this as an example of something that leaders today should be gleaning. Moshe as a model of, if you really want to form a community, this tells us something. This tells us something. Is it believable? I think so. I think so.
You know what, Bracha? That concept is really part of fundraising 101. If you look at various community campaigns, there's always value put on whatever you can bring to the mix, and that all of the small parts go together to create the whole. UJA uses that concept all the time when talking about a meaningful gift. It's what's meaningful to you and not what others see your gift as being.
Okay. But when you say that it's meaningful to the giver, but it's obviously something that's worth giving to the greater.
Exactly. But whatever you can give is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when Sachs talks about this, he talks in a very down-to-earth way. There has to be a tolerance, I don't even know if that's the correct word, but an appreciation in our communities that if we didn't have a community, we might not survive. And that I need you and you need me, and another time I'll need her, she'll need me, and that we each fulfill a different purpose. Now, we can think of examples of, is that the way people see things? In a class this morning, in the context of a discussion, someone raised the issue of the conflict between those who serve in Sahel in the Israeli army, but are not observant, and those who don't serve in the army, but learn. And can those two groups, is it possible for them to see that each is needed? Or that might not be a great example, because can you compare? I'm just raising the issues that were discussed. Can you compare somebody who's willing to give up his or her life with somebody who is sitting and studying? Now, notice I didn't just say just studying, but these are issues that cause divisions. Certainly, in another context, we talked about Rav Kook having an appreciation, who was definitely very, very observant, but had an appreciation that I needed the rebellious pioneers who came from Europe, who wanted to break with tradition. We need them, because if they didn't do this, we wouldn't have our land. But these are real issues of, and that's just one example of divisions between people who have to find something that will allow them to realize, and Sachs says this, that we are all in this together. Now, I don't know if you can think of examples in your own particular communities, but it's real. And there has to be something common enough that everybody feels that holds us together, but we do this, you do that, and that's going to be okay. Nobody has the truth. Anyone? Have I just
Bracha, it's just so insightful that for years we're figuring out how to bring people together and how to create community, which is the essence of Judaism. And it's just it's so wise and inspiring. Yeah.
I think we've seen a lot of that coming together for a common purpose, but coming at it in different ways throughout this whole period of COVID. If you'd seen some of the community action and the outreach to seniors and the shul outreach, all of those various parts have come together to for the benefit of a community. And I think it's been an important lesson for all of us during this time.
Well, you know,
yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is Joel in Ottawa. To me, I'm thinking at the Canada level that Canada has, I guess Trudeau started it or articulated, Pierre Trudeau, multiculturalism as a way. First of all, we have to recognize that there are Aboriginal people here first, and then there were the English and French colonialists, which have their separate identity, and now Canada has so many identities that multiculturalism allowed Canadians to celebrate, to maintain their identity, and yet contribute to the larger Canadian ethic of, a good place for all with healthcare and with democracy and freedoms. In essence, it's kind of like Moshe, letting everyone contribute in your own way, but still maintaining your identity.
Okay, yeah. Sachs asked the question because he's only physically gone a few months. So he was around and still very articulate through Corona. And he wrote suggesting that he prays that people will come out of this differently, that this isn't just going to be a phase where we're thinking about changes that should happen in society, maybe some of my own priorities, but he believes that it will have an impact. He's praying it will have an impact. And if there are some negative habits that we each have found ourselves doing, it's that we appreciate that life, relationships are very special. And as soon as this is over, that we're going to jump up and forget about that. People are telling me about walks they've been taking and didn't know until now that just around the corner from them was this beautiful park. And I myself, there's a, what's it called? Where I was told not to go by myself, by my sister, Jerusalem, Yar Shalom, the Peace Forest near Talpiot, Mizrach. Beautiful, beautiful. That's just one small instance. Now, to move on, it's important to realize that Sachs' concern for shared humanity isn't just when building the Holy Mishkan, Tabernacle. He believes that if we're talking about community, that's on so many different levels, and this sense of being in it together has to even be found in the business world, the economic market, where self-interest usually rules. So look at text number 6, where he talks about this market. The market is not just companies and corporations buying and selling, profits and losses. It is also a mindset, a mentality, a way of looking at things. Markets do not guarantee equity, responsibility, and integrity. He says that's not the market's job. That's the job of leaders, of education. There are many values that the market undermines. Take loyalty, and it's a very interesting discussion. Loyalty And he means in business. Loyalty means sustaining our commitment to a person or a cause through the bad times as well as the good ones. Imagine you're a CEO of companies, and this is happening these days, and you have to decide, do I have to let somebody go? And he talks about the discrepancy between the salary and the take home of most CEOs and their employees. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there was just an article written, I don't know in which magazine, Canadian. You recently hosted Shauna Goodman, the chef. Yes, you know who I'm talking about, from Israel, lives in Renana. Gersh and Sheila Sohn's daughter-in-law. Her brother in Montreal, you have to find this article and read it, because he's speaking like Sachs as to how things can become more moral in the business world. His name is, I believe, John Goodman or Jonathan. All right, you'll be able to find it.
Bracha, the article was in the Globe and Mail. I have it on my email if anybody.
So everybody, please email Merle, and she'll send it to you or deliver it in person, because she's so desperate to see people. Okay. So getting back to this, take loyalty. Loyalty means sustaining our commitment to a person or a cause through the bad times as well as the good ones. Loyalty means not making constant comparisons in search of a new brand. You know, there's even halacha that you don't go into a store if you're really not intending on buying that computer there. You just went to see it and then you're going to order it online. Or I remember, you know, the little outside strip mall at Bayview and Cummer. Yeah. So many, many years ago, there was a couple, I believe they were a Jewish couple who had a shoe store. I don't know if anybody can remember that. And I remember once going in there, and it was when I was a child, and I remember my mother saying, no, don't go in, because the shoes you're wearing, you didn't get there. You know, these kinds of law, which is, you know, absurd now. You have a right to buy something else, but it's these very practical and these mundane actions that we take or don't take that will impact on us more than beliefs and credos. There's a story going around now that a young woman who's from a Haredi family, and she met a young man, and they were going to get married, and she brought him to meet her very frum grandfather. And she was so nervous. What did the grandfather ask his future grandson-in-law? He didn't ask him about, do you believe in God? What did he ask him? Do you put on tefillin? And the tefillin is a symbol of actually doing something. Okay, all right. So now, loyalty means not making constant comparisons in search of a new brand. We are not freely floating atoms on an ocean of possibilities. Though some people would like to think, you know, I want this, I want that, I can do this. We have attachments. Now remember, Rabbi Sachs is making relationships, not just collective, but one-to-one, a very crucial element in our lives. We have attachments to our family, our friends, our colleagues, and what he calls social capital at all levels is built out of loyalties. Limits to greed the market and its mindset must be set. And this is very interesting because this is now talking not just about this community, but it's almost a plug for Tu B'Shvat. Business is not about short-term profit, but about long-term benefit to the public, shareholders and employees alike. What does he mean by that? That last sentence, somebody.
Go ahead.
Well, I think a business has responsibility to their employees. I mean, we see that you know, in business, if you have a good workplace, then employees are more productive. And so you have a responsibility to your employees.
You know,
But listen to what you just said. Am I the only one who heard it? That why should you be loyal? And I don't think you mean to say this, because if you're nice to them, sure, that's true. They'll be more productive, but for the company's sake. So you're not doing it for the most altruistic reasons. What else is he saying here when he says it's not about, yes, you're right. You have to know how to treat your employees. Business is not about short-term profit, but about long-term benefit. So what is he saying the people in charge have to be deciding, thinking? They have to have a meeting about what? Sure, this might be good for us at this very moment, but is it ecologically okay for the future communities, et cetera, et cetera? In other words, even in the most mundane of activities, there is place for being moral. No way to escape that. Now, you know, last week I said, if what I present that Sachs is describing is strange to you, then that's good. It means that you're not confronting these issues and you hang out with the right kind of people. What do you think about what he's saying about the market? And of course, I'm just bringing it very concisely. Anybody? Yeah, you look, Stan, that you want to say something.
The market's going through a very difficult time. You're talking about a shoe store in a plaza. The retail business is in upheaval because of what? Because of people going to another venue, which is called online marketing, online shopping. And the little fellow on the store with the shoes, which we should be trying to help him get along in his business. He's got a family to support. He's part of the community. He's giving back. He belongs to our shul. He has a dress shop, but we don't go to that dress shop just because he belongs to our shul. We order from the wholesale. We order from the online. So that's another complicating factor that we have to deal with in our society today. And ideally, we should be helping those people in our community who are struggling in retail, but we're not. It's a difficult problem because the Amazons of the world are on top of everything and doing great. Throughout this pandemic, they've been flourishing. The profits have increased, I would say, probably over 100% what they did last year before the pandemic. Well, and the poor guy on the corner, first of all, has been locked down and not doing any business. And whenever they do open up, they're not doing any business anyways because Amazon trucks are all over the city delivering parcels. So it's a problem.
So is it crazy to think that the leader of a country would be aware, because if Stan Solomon is aware of that he wouldn't be aware of that and set up some kind of network to make sure that each one, and I'm not just talking in Canada, but here as well,
Yeah.
Okay, these are real issues. Now, what is the antidote? Because I said he's going to bring another example. What is the antidote to this mindset of greed and wanting more and self-interest? Anybody? Something from our Jewish tradition and loyalty to others.
Tzedakah, to share, and even, the levels of tzedakah, like Maimonides talked about, to help others, help themselves become independent as the highest form of tzedakah.
Absolutely, Joel. That's yet another, something different in our tradition, something that shows that we're dedicated to things that have a value and not a price. Time in which we show a dedication to things that have value, even if they don't cost anything.
Well, Shabbat.
Okay. Yes.
Prayer.
So, Shabbat. I don't know if you're familiar with this Michael Walzer. He spent time at the Hartman Institute. Has a wonderful book called Exodus and the Revolution, something. But Sachs quotes him here in talking about Shabbat. Consider Shabbat. Michael Walzer, the Princeton political philosopher, draws attention to the difference between holidays and holy days, or as he puts it, between vacations and Shabbat. The idea of a vacation as a private holiday is relatively recent. Walzer dates it to the 1870s. Its essence is its individualist or familial character. Everyone plans his own vacation, goes where he wants to go, does what he wants to do. Shabbat, by contrast, is essentially collective. Now, I know you can argue that there are families who go away, but Shabbat, by contrast, is essentially collective. Now, if you make Kiddush on Shabbat morning, so it will say, remember the Shabbat day to keep it holy, 6 days you shall labor, but the seventh day is a Shabbat to God. On it you shall do no work. You, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger within your gates. What is that telling us? You, your son and daughter, your male and female servant, your ox, your donkey, your other animals, and the stranger in your gates, it is public, shared, the property of us all. There is no hierarchy on Shabbat for 25 hours. Now you could say, so for 1 day a week and then you go for the other days? Well, Eliezer Schweid would always say that when we have that day of Shabbat, or when we have a Yom Tov or a Chag, we leave that because we spend most of our time in Chol and not Kadosh, but we leave that and go back to the mundane, hopefully in a different way. That it will make me think, so I am the boss. I have employees, but I'll think twice about how I treat them. So it is public, shared, the property of us all. A vacation is a commodity. We buy it. Shabbat is not something we buy. It is available to each on the same terms. Enjoyed for everyone, enjoyed by everyone. We take vacations as individuals or families. We celebrate Shabbat as a community. Now, think of the issues that he raised last week, and we reminded ourselves of them today, about lack of face-to-face interaction, about people, and not just children, by the way, but adults being on their social media and their devices so much of the time. Shabbat isn't a day of do's or don'ts. That's how people who don't appreciate the value and the message of Shabbat see it. But take a break, at least 25 hours from the rat race. Spend those 25, or not 25 hours, but spend that Shabbat meal in the evening and the lunch with your family and friends. Play board games, talk, read to each other. But these are things you can't put a price on. Should at least be able to take a break. And it might sound strange, but not everybody knows how to take a break from being in the rat race. But it's also a time that you say 6 days a week, and that's a mitzvah as well. We're commanded to work 6 days. So that's a mitzvah, but let me create those 6 days, be very productive, but at least take one day to appreciate the gifts. Because ultimately, what Sachs will say is, one thing that should tie us all together is that each of us is created the same. We bring to the table different things, but we are created the same and created in the image of God. And when I take that break on Shabbat, I'm saying I don't just care about myself. I'm willing to recognize that there is something beyond me. There is a power beyond me. And I have to have that sense of appreciation for that, because that makes for a different type of person. If you can say, I'm important, but only to a certain point. There has to be some self-limitation. And that's not a punishment, because ultimately we gain by letting others in and engaging them as being equally important to me. And we'll close with what he says here. For 6 days a week, the days that are whole, God makes space for us to be creative. On the seventh day, the day that is kadosh, holy, we make space for God by acknowledging that we are his creations. That has to make for more of a humble person in some way. And what applies in time applies also in space. There are secular places where we pursue our own purposes, and there's nothing negative about that. And there are holy places where we open ourselves fully and without reserve to God's purposes. If this is so, we have before us an idea with life-transforming implications. The highest achievement is not self-expression, but self-limitation, making space for something other and different from us. Because that's his thing. Life is about relationships. So you have to limit yourself in order to really relate genuinely to an other or others. He goes on, the happiest marriages are those in which each spouse makes space for the other to be his or herself. Great parents make space for their children. Great leaders make space for their followers. Great teachers make space for their pupils. They are there when needed, but they don't crush or inhibit or try to dominate. They practice what in Kabbalah is called tzimtzum, self-limitations, so that others have the space to grow. And ultimately, if we allow others to grow, we benefit from that. We benefit from that. So when we talk of Rabbi Sachs, reminds me that if you look at Pirkei Avot, you will see Rabbi Yochanan Omer, Rabbi Yitzchak Omer. These are people who have been gone for hundreds and hundreds of years. So we should be saying Rabbi Yochanan Amar said, but we say, and we will always do that because like Rashi, like Ramban, like Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Sachs will continue to say to us, I am sure for many, many years to come. And so again, I think our sponsor was not here when I thanked Shelley and Jill and Murray for enabling this. We appreciate it. I joked at the beginning that because of the lockdown that we are in as we speak, I wouldn't have been able to go out, but this was my Purim Suda, eating up, I'm sorry for being corny, my time with you. And I pray that my prophecy for a civil war in the next few days, because of what's probably happening, will not happen. And we will all have a Freilich Purim, and that everybody should listen to the directives here. You know that people are probably getting dressed up as policemen so that they can, whatever.
Bracha, what book? What?
Is it gone?
Yes.
Which of Rabbi Sachs's books are you taking much of this from? It's wonderful stuff.
I took, where is it?
Morality.
Yes, I know, but I want to show it. Morality, restoring the common good in divided times. And that really sums it up. And now I'm really going to impress you. Because if you look, you can see, because this book wasn't around in English, I did it on my own. And you can see the difficult Hebrew. It says, radikalit as, radical then, veradikalit achshav.
Oh,
Anyway.
that is impressive.